Raheem Mostert goes down and Elijah Mitchell goes off. So is he the back to own now in San Francisco? That and more today on the Dynasty Newsletter. I'm your host, Adam Wilde, joined by my co-host, Chris Allen. Chris, is everyone going to blow all their fab on Elijah Mitchell?
Yeah, and I think they should. Well, for at least from a process standpoint, right? Because for most folks, I'm assuming your waiver wires have been more or less picked clean at this point. So it's not like you're going to be able to let him fall through the cracks of some folks as they're making their waiver claims, like either tonight or tomorrow. So yeah, you would want to bid like fairly aggressively on what we think is going to be at least not even what we think, what we know is a lucrative backfield in the 49ers. And we just watched him essentially come into the game cold, more or less. And then he racks up like over 100 yards, like on the ground, scores that touchdown, receives the bulk of the workload, and he gets what we had expected either Raheem Mostert or Trey Sermon to get, but obviously because Sermon was a healthy scratch, he wasn't able to get in on the fun against the Detroit Lions rush defense. So yeah, I think that he should be a guy that if we weren't talking about him prior to Sunday, or even shortly before Sunday, after we got the news that Sermon was going to be inactive, now's the time that we essentially have to pay that tax of not jumping on that news prior to kickoff and bid aggressively on what we know is going to be a productive asset like on our squad.
So Raheem Mostert is out between 6 and 8 weeks with a meniscus tear. And as you mentioned, Trey Sermon was a healthy scratch. That was a surprise to everybody. I mean, the DFS community, we had to make a last-minute swap. I put Raheem Mostert in cash last minute. So we felt like there was value with Raheem Mostert even at age 29, even though he hasn't played more than, I believe, 9 games in a season. He's still been productive. It's still been the San Francisco offense. But in the Dynasty community, we've been discussing, the Trey Sermon, Elijah Mitchell backfield in the future with a 1-2 punch from, a 2-down back and Trey Sermon who could actually catch and pass protect, but with Elijah Mitchell being productive and honestly everybody just wanting to force him to be a thing, they believe that Raheem Mostert was going to be gone next year and it was just going to be Trey Sermon and Elijah Mitchell. And then we get Ja'Marr Hasty and Elijah Mitchell and no Trey Sermon. And we're thinking, how on earth did that happen after the 49ers traded up for Trey Sermon? And there was some positive buzz in camp, but Kyle Shanahan's one to keep it close to the vest. So I'm not so certain we really need to worry too much about Trey Sermon yet because he has to play next week, right? With Raheem Mostert down. Jeff Wilson won't be back until week 6. So it's really going to be, and I said Jamichael Hasty. Jeff Wilson won't be back until week 6. So you're going to have to see an active Trey Sermon. I believe that Trey Sermon is going to be a productive back in this system. So if they give him any carries at all, hopefully he shows enough to prove that he should be suiting up on game days.
Right. And I think this is all, now that we're talking about this is all hindsight analysis at this point. Right. But it does point to, or at least should kind of put us in this mindset of, well, instead of looking at players and prospects through the lens of, well, how productive could they be for us from a fantasy perspective? Let's also look at specific situations and how they could be productive just from a football standpoint. And I bring this up because one of the stories that came out like shortly after we knew it was going to be Elijah Mitchell's backfield, or at least for the time being, right? Like with the rotation and so on and so forth. There was a tweet from David Lombardi from The Athletic saying that looking at the offense that Elijah Mitchell was a part of when he was at Louisiana Lafayette, during his final season, they actually had an analyst go and take a look at the similarities between the offense that he ran in college and the 49ers offense. And there was a striking number of similarities between what they ran for him in college and what the 49ers did. And that was actually part of the reason why they wound up taking him, because they knew he'd be able to pick up on the playbook as quickly as possible. And if you look at Mitchell's athletic profile, he actually profiles as a guy that would fit really well with the Shanahan offense. I mean, we were so excited about what Raheem Mostert could do this season, and what was the reason for that? His explosiveness,
Yeah,
his,
speed,
his speed,
explosiveness, ability, and space.
and that's exactly what Mitchell has. I mean, a 4.4 40 at his pro day. I mean, has burst, has that same level of athleticism as guys like Jerick McKinnon, so on and so forth, that have been featured in an offense beforehand. It's just that now he gets thrust into the limelight because we were so excited about Mostert, because we'd seen him do it in years past. We were excited about Trey Sermon because of the draft capital that's spent on him. But it's just that little bit of information about Elijah Mitchell, and just seeing how, at least the fact that he was a part of that backfield, a backfield that we knew rotated backs from like Kyle Juszczyk to Jeff Wilson. I mean, so it's just like in that specific situation, picking up a guy that could be a part of that rotation should have been on our radar, even if it was absolutely for free. And if he winds up like just not panning out or anything like that, we could just drop him. But at least knowing that specific situation, it'd almost be like, let's say if almost like what is it? The Byron Pringle news for the Kansas City Chiefs. It's not that we like part of his athletic profile did lend itself to at least him being out there on the field, but it's just also like, why are most folks holding on to Byron Pringle in Dynasty? Because he's attached to the Chiefs offense.
Right.
It's the exact, at least in my mind, it's the same. It's like a similar situation where we don't really know what the talent level is, but given the situation, given how they use like that particular position. So with Patrick Mahomes, it's wide receivers. With San Francisco, it's running backs. Being able to pick up an asset that could be attached to that sort of production, like should things break their way, it should be a part of our process. And so just seeing all that play out, it's like, man, I should have had him like on, the back end of my roster, like just thinking about it. But, c'est la vie.
In fairness, in deeper leagues, he probably wouldn't have been on the waiver wire anyway, so people aren't rushing to spend their fab because he was probably drafted in like the 4th or sometimes 5th in dynasty rookie drafts, and it was because he was a part of the San Francisco offense. I mean, Devy guys knew that he was going to be a productive back in that sort of system, but for the most part, it was just he was a running back that was drafted in the Shanahan system. We understand how it's a revolving door for running backs in that system, and so he was going to get opportunity eventually. We didn't know it was going to be week 1, so now we have to transition over to Trey Sermon, someone we were excited about, someone who was like the 202 in Superflex drafts, a first in non-Superflex drafts. What do you do with them? Nothing. What are you gonna do? Nothing. You angrily shake your fist at your bench if you want, but there's nothing you can do. So he didn't get the exciting start that we hoped for. I didn't think that it was going to be too terribly exciting anyways, because I thought Raheem Mostert was going to get a bulk of the workload. Maybe that was bullish, but just rookie running backs usually don't get thrusted in the way that Elijah Mitchell obviously did. So it's not typical for Trey Sermon to come in and take a bulk of the workload. That's actually a conversation that you and I had when we were discussing if we were going to play Raheem Mostert. I was all in on Raheem Mostert because I didn't believe that Trey Sermon basically earned the touches in Kyle Shanahan's eyes. Now, I was more right than I knew because he didn't even earn a jersey for the day in Kyle Shanahan's eyes yet in camp. So that was a tough scene. It's not exciting, but we still got 16 games. We're going to see plenty of Trey Sermon, and it just so happens that he gets his redemption arc perhaps next week.
We'll see. Yeah, we'll see.
So if you're listening to the show, you're knowing that we're coming from the email list. You can go over to footballguys.com and click on the email list. You're going to get news coming from Joe Bryant, Cecil Lammey, Sigmund Bloom. And if you notice that the list got noticeably larger since football season started, we went from about 7 blurbs to about 20 to 30 blurbs in an email because there's just so much going on around the NFL. We were struggling for topics at one point, and now it's like we have to sift through them and decide which ones are really worth talking about. So here on the Dynasty Newsletter, we take that email list, we sift through it, and we decide which one we're going to be able to talk about and kind of what is actionable for Dynasty right now. So Dynasty kind of, some people say it converts over to redraft. You still have to look at long-term in Dynasty, and there's ways to capitalize. I mean, you're probably not buying Trey Sermon cheap right now because people are more savvy than that in most cases. But on a week-to-week basis, there are going to be things that we see that are going to go against kind of what we were expecting. So
Mhm.
the next thing I'm going to bring up, I'm actually going to jump down to Jamar Chase. It's a perfect segue because it's what some of us were expecting, perhaps not what everyone was expecting after all of the drops, after all of the drama, after the Instagram video gets put up and taken down. It was all turmoil around Jamar Chase. You saw it in best ball. He dropped three rounds. You saw it in Dynasty. People were trying to get what they could for him before seeing a single snap out of him. So it's not even the Jamar Chase victory lap because he did what he was supposed to do. He
Mhm.
he he was better than Justin Jefferson. Just wrap your head around the fact that Jamar Chase was actually better than
Right.
the amazing Justin Jefferson. And so he comes out and he puts up 7 receptions for 101 yards and a touch. But in addition to that, a 29% market share. Now, I will say T. Higgins did get a little banged up. You might know better than me as a Bengals fan, but I did see the Q tag next to T. Higgins, and I saw him stop scoring points. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that T. Higgins got a little bit banged up in that game. So with that being the case, maybe the 29% market share isn't to be relied on. However, 29% is like DeAndre Hopkins, Devontae Adams. Like that's not going to happen on a regular basis, but that puts them comfortably in the 20% range. And I remember you and I talking about it a few weeks ago for rookie wide receivers early on. We're happy if they get 18%. Like
Mhm.
if you're for example, Devonta Smith, we're happy if Devonta Smith gets 18% because he is the wide receiver one on his team, but he's also a rookie. So if he's getting 18, 19%, that's really good. Jamar Chase is going to be comfortably over 20%, and that's with T. Higgins, who, they're both pretty much equal talents, similar talents at least. I guess Jamar Chase is technically better, and then Tyler Boyd also garners touches. So when you're talking about having two very, very good receivers next to you, and you're still going to garner over 20%, that's like basically Jamar Chase is going to deserve to be where he was drafted, which was like a top, 14 wide receiver in Dynasty, 14, 15 wide receiver in Dynasty as a rookie.
Right. And for the folks that were wondering, because that game was played like in like 90 plus degree heat, like T. Higgins actually left the game to get an IV midway through
Interesting.
the game. And then he wound up coming back and everything was fine. But yeah, I don't think it changes Chase's value. If anything, for those that bought low, or at least if there was a dip to be had, at least the perceived
Every
dip,
week
like
we
over
got
the back
closer and
end.
closer to saying that you should buy low on them. Like I
Yeah.
don't think we ever got there, but it did almost get to the point where people were ready to sell him.
Right. And so for folks that might have bought into that and were able to capitalize on it by not like offering a lowball offer, obviously, but if they were able to capitalize on that, you absolutely got what you wanted. I mean, led the team in targets, not just from and like led the team in targets, but also air yards as well. I mean, that's what we really needed to see. I mean, he had like a beautiful deep shot from Joe Burrow down the right sideline, like during the third quarter, if I'm remembering correctly. So it's just everything that you wanted, like essentially from your first round pick and from what the Bengals expect him to be, exactly what we needed to see, like coming right out of the gates. We'll see if that gets sustained, right? Because T. Higgins did leave, but Higgins was just like right behind him in terms of targets. So I can see
Sure.
from a deployment and usage standpoint, it meets our expectations. It meets our projections of how Cincinnati was going to wind up using that trio of wide receivers. So I think the plan is being executed perfectly as of right now.
And while we're there, we might as well talk about Joe Burrow. I mean, Joe Burrow coming off with the knee injury, it was speculated that he would take a while to end up coming along. He didn't light the world on fire, but they showed that they were going to be the offense that they needed to be for Zach Taylor to keep his job. And I don't know what side of the fence I land on, whether needs to happen or not. I at least like knowing that they have a head coach that wants to throw a ridiculous amount, because that means more fantasy production for us, even for Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon seemed to be involved in the passing game as well, or at least he's staying in on third downs pretty much permanently. So we want Zach Taylor to stay, in my opinion, and that's good because Joe Burrow looks like not mid-season form by any stretch, but way better than I'm scared about my knee. That's for certain. So he supported 3 wide receivers. Tyler Boyd didn't do amazing, but he was still involved in the offense. So basically, we needed to see Jamar Chase be great. We needed to see Joe Burrow be at least not playing timid. And we also needed to see what T. Higgins was going to be able to do with a 29% Jamar Chase across from him. T. Higgins was still very productive. He had like 14 points in PPR, and he like we said, he played like half the game. So that's more points for Joe Burrow that got left on the table too, in my opinion. So we could have seen even better offense out of these guys. I think Tyler Boyd might actually be a little bit of a buy candidate, just because he looks like the odd man out right now, and he's a little bit older in age. He's going to be a productive wide receiver. He's going to be like a Jarvis Landry type this year. And I say that as wholeheartedly as I can. I love Jarvis Landry. I'm part of the Jarvis Landry fan club. So it's going to be the type of thing where it's like nobody ever wants to play Tyler Boyd, but Tyler Boyd continuously is involved in a high power, up-tempo offense. So that's a target that I look at in that Cincinnati offense as well.
Right. And I think that's the really big takeaway here is just noticing at least the slight shift in how the targets have been divvied out. We are seeing Joe Mixon's ascension into having like a higher usage level. I forget who it was. It might've been Jared Smola on Twitter talking about like his utilization rate and the number of routes and targets that he got, highest it's ever been like throughout his short career, like with the Bengals. So we love to see that. Joe Burrow did take a step back in terms of neutral passing this past week. They were one of like the lower teams from a neutral passing standpoint, but if you were concerned about the knee or at least the offensive line and like what they were going to do in order to protect him, I mean, he was like hurried on a few passes, did take a couple of sacks, but it wasn't nothing outlandish. He wasn't taking like a massive number of shots, but they were using these empty sets and like multiple like 3-4 wide receiver sets in order to, I guess, keep him protected. So for the most part, at least the plan of keeping him protected, mitigating that risk of passing over guys like Penei Sewell and like so on and so forth and taking Chase, it looks like at least the team has a sense of how they can do that while still being able to continue their pass happy schematic, like from an offensive perspective.
Sure. So we have a heavy topic to finish off with, but before we get to it, we've got the League Dominator up on the iOS and Android marketplaces. So if you want to subscribe to Footballguys and you want to save time, worry less, win more, we help you do that with the League Dominator app. So go over to your iOS or Android market, download the League Dominator app, and help dominate your leagues. So the last thing that we're going to finish with is rookie quarterbacks. All the rookie quarterbacks saw action this weekend. 3 of them started. 2 of them had touchdowns. So we've got a lot to dissect here, and I guess we go in order of them being drafted, right? So Trevor Lawrence is first, and he had a shaky start with 3 interceptions. I am very afraid for that Jaguars offense. I think one of the bigger videos we caught flack for was seeming like we were slightly too worried for Trevor Lawrence, but it was never Trevor Lawrence. It was always the organization, the offense, maybe not the surrounding cast. I do like the surrounding cast, but when you're going to give Carlos Hyde more touches than James Robinson, what does it matter, the surrounding cast, right? So we've got Trevor Lawrence with the 3 picks, but also the 3 touchdowns, but also perhaps in what we would consider garbage time against, by the way, the Texans are like the worst roster that I remember seeing since I've played fantasy. So for like 10 years, I cannot think of a worse roster than the Texans, and they put a shellacking on the Jaguars. So props to them. But Trevor Lawrence comes back in garbage time, looks pretty good. Did you see anything that worries you in that, or is there nothing for you to react to yet?
I'm not worried, because we do need to keep in context that it is his first, is his NFL debut, so on and so forth. But for the guy that they did wind up taking at the 101, his like moments of brilliance really came in flashes, and it wasn't like sustained excellence throughout the game, which you were kind of hoping to see. But if you watched him throughout the preseason, I mean, that's essentially how their preseason looked. Like for the first like couple of preseason games, it was like, okay, this isn't all that great. But then like towards the back end of the preseason, you started to see that same quarterback that we watched like out of Clemson. So it's just, okay. And so I can take that, because he was second to last in terms of both like EPA per play, like and also CPOE, like completion percentage over expected. Like that's the thing that I pay attention to the most, because I can at least contextualize EPA per play just based off of the game flow itself.
Right.
Like since they were trailing for so much, I can see him taking deeper shots. I can see him trying to like push the boundaries of what he can do or the throws he's going to be making. So that could at least change or at least affect like that particular metric. But completion percentage over expected, that just means he's not putting the ball where it's supposed to be. I mean, that is not affected, isn't not as much of influenced by like drops or anything like that. So that is somewhat worrisome, especially against this Texans defense that we at least all had projected to be bad.
Right.
So I need to see that pick up. I need to see some improvement there in that perspective. And also no rushing. I mean, it's like not at least like not, it wasn't a huge factor in that game. Too. Right. And that's the other thing I didn't really get in terms of like play calling or anything like that, because we knew that Lawrence could move. So without seeing that really, I guess I'm confused as to how Urban Meyer and Darrell Bevell is going to be calling these games like moving forward, because it just seemed like there was some level of just confusion over the personnel and how to use them. And from a talent evaluation perspective, you'd think they would have had that figured out already.
And that's why I felt like that was like why you were playing Trevor Lawrence in DFS this week, because you felt like people didn't know about his rushing upside, but it was there and then it wasn't. And that was very strange when you're playing catch up behind such a terrible defense and you're not making plays happen in the rush game. And like you said, completion over expected shows, did you make things happen? And Trevor Lawrence, in fact, didn't. But this all goes back to, it's not even Trevor Lawrence that I'm necessarily worried about. I mean, he's going to come along like normal. Maybe he won't light the world on fire right away, but it's the organization that I'm worried about. It's the Carlos Hyde getting more touches than James Robinson. It's bad. And now there's things coming out off the field about Urban Meyer, how he's handling the team situation like that. Might end up being a coaching change by the end of the season, I'm predicting, which just, you don't want to see Trevor Lawrence, someone that you've invested so much in, both in fantasy and in real life, their organization, that is, be surrounded by such turmoil stuff. So when you get to the second overall quarterback, we're talking about Zach Wilson here. Zach Wilson was much ado about nothing. I mean, he didn't do anything too amazing. He didn't do anything terrible. Actually, I think he looked better than I expected him to. So, and his connection with Corey Davis, that was incredible. Unfortunately, that came to like hurt Elijah Moore. That hurt a lot of our wallets. That hurt our feelings on Elijah Moore in Dynasty. We thought he was just going to take off running, especially since Jamison Crowder was inactive. So the narrative followed him beautifully to just a complete blow-up spot, and we got nothing out of Elijah Moore. But I'm pretty promising performance from Zach Wilson. Just losing Mekhi Becton really hurts, and I hope that's not long-term.
Yeah, and I think that's where, because Zach Wilson was, as of right now, I mean, we're recording this during the Monday night game, but Zach Wilson dead last in CPOE, like pretty close to the bottom as well in terms of EPA per play. But yeah, it's the accuracy thing that's like really going to, like, because it's not like they were taking a ton of deep shots either. So these are more like intermediate, like short routes, and we're still having like that as an issue. But if you're seeing that much pressure because they lost Becton, if I'm not mistaken, like midway through the game. Yeah. So it's just, I can kind of understand, especially considering, and this was part of the problem, or at least not part of the problem, but at least something that we noted was that BYU having such a strong offensive line throughout his entire collegiate career, and then shifting to the Jets. Could this be an issue? And week one, not to say it confirms it, but at least points us in that direction that, yeah, this might be a problem for Zach Wilson. But also that was the other thing with Wilson. Didn't really see a ton of rushing there either. So I'm I don't know. I'm actually kind of surprised that these coaches and offensive coordinators aren't really trying to just make that a part of like their offensive game plan. Now, if it's a part of, if the worry or the risk of injuring like their highly drafted pick in like the first week of the season is part of the issue, okay, fine. But if that's part of the issue of why you're not converting on third downs or not being able to generate that offensive drives in order to score points, then really you need to be finding like all the things that could be possible in order to like put your team in a position to win. And so far, I mean, for these first two guys, it's just like we knew Trevor Lawrence could run, and at least we know that Zach Wilson is mobile, but neither of them are really showing up in like on the stat sheets in that area. So again, I'm left kind of confused as to what the game plan is moving forward, because if you're really not. I mean, the Jets, they're not even using Denzel Mims. They already had Jameson Crowder out on because of COVID. So it's just, what is the plan here? How else are you supposed to get these drives going when you're using these like this pretty big rotation at the running back position and featuring guys like Braxton Berrios in your passing game? There has to be something more to this offense. And so unless it's Zach Wilson on the run, then I don't know how to help him.
Yeah, the first two are interesting because you noted that their CPOE was miserable, but also they didn't run. So if you're not completing passes and you're also not, when are you going to run? So that is an interesting thing to point out. Speaking of running, the next two quarterbacks are both in that weird like Lamar Jackson first year where it's like, we know you're really good and you should probably be playing, but instead we're just going to bring you in randomly so that like we know you're paying attention to the game, I guess. So Trey Lance comes in on his Trey Lance packages. The thing I liked about the 49ers usage of Trey Lance is that they used him all over the field instead of like, okay, it's an important down, we're going to bring in Justin Fields. Okay, we're inside the 20, let's give Justin Fields one shot. Okay, he does well. All right, take him off the field. Like we saw Justin Fields come in to try to score a touchdown. We saw Trey Lance come in to try to alter a game. And that's the difference between Kyle Shanahan and Matt Nagy. So the first thing we'll talk about is Trey Lance. Trey Lance will be in sooner than later. I mean, you can't have Debo with an 8 out of -23 just putting up 35 fantasy points every week. So it's not going to be long before we see Trey Lance, but promising to come in on his packages and do well.
Yeah, and I think that's the key part is that, and again, no rushing. It was a passing touchdown, like for Trey Lance. That was the thing, and to Trent Sherfield, but that's a whole other thing. But it's just, if that's the level of play, at least the level of confidence and like where and like the ball placement accuracy, like so on and so forth. If that's where we're at with Trey Lance as a passer, then that makes me all the more excited to see him like fully unlocked and like once it becomes like the true starter for the 49ers. So I'm excited to see where this goes, but it's not going to be every week that they're playing against such a poor defense.
Sure. Yep. And then that brings us over to Justin Fields playing against an incredible Rams defense, and it didn't look too big for him at all. The first time we saw Justin Fields was on I want to believe it was like the 15, and it was a beautiful pass, and he had to hold the ball a little bit, and that's always been. Everyone thinks he holds the ball too much. I felt like that play was perfect, and got a huge completion on first down to set him up for a go-ahead, or not a go-ahead touchdown, but for a touchdown to keep him sort of in the game. So I didn't like the Justin Fields usage very much. I didn't think it was creative at all. Two of the plays he came in were basically just passing plays, and that's so weird to me. If you think that he provides a greater percent chance of converting, why is he just not your quarterback? So that game led me more and more to believe that Matt Nagy just doesn't want to hurt Andy Dalton's feelings. And if you step back from a human perspective, I guess I get it, but there's money to be made here and you need to keep your job. So Justin Fields should be on the field more often than not in the coming weeks.
Right. And I'm trying to figure out what the plan was for Fields in this particular game.
Weird.
Because it just felt like they were just subbing him in just to sub him in. It's not like he was given a series. It's not like he was given a drive. He would come in, have a play, and then he would come right back out, and you'd see him on the sidelines, just holding holding his pads or whatever. Yeah. And then they bring him in for the red zone play when he winds up scoring that rushing touchdown. It's like, what was the plan? Was he just supposed to? I know as a professional athlete, you're supposed to be ready to come in and play at any time, but it's just, what was the plan here? Like, was that really like what the script for the Bears offense in that, like for that particular drive? It's like, all right, we're going to have Andy get us all the way down there. We get down to the 4 or 5 yard line. Justin, you're in. It's like, I don't know. Again, I'm confused as to, from a coaching's perspective, what's this plan for deploying some of these rookies? And I know now, especially with Adam Schefter, coming out, I think earlier today, talking about we don't know if we're kind of revisiting this whole making him sit behind Andy Dalton, type of thing. And then of course, now it brings up the whole Patrick Mahomes sitting behind Alex Smith, all this other stuff. That's not that plan that might have worked for the Packers with Favre and Rodgers, and which might have worked, or if you think about it in hindsight, it might have worked for the Chiefs with Mahomes and Alex Smith. that's really not the fact that they sat behind them. That talent was always there.
You're right.
Like,
So
Mahomes
many
always
people,
had the talent.
so many people have came out about Mahomes and just laugh about that like players that played with him just laugh about that narrative because
It's just
like
ridiculous.
Alex Smith was standing on the sidelines and all at Mahomes running the scout team, and like everyone just laughs at it because they say there's no reason Mahomes couldn't have started in year one.
Exactly. So it's just, I don't understand like why we're bringing up that tired narrative, and yet Justin Fields clearly has the tools capable of piloting that team way better than the current starter. So to say that he needs to sit behind or should sit behind Andy Dalton, who got crushed in that game that we just watched last night, it completely baffles me. Again, like that is now like the third rookie quarterback that I'm just confused as to the coaching decisions made around them. Now, it's not about their talent. It's about the people that have been put around them that we're trusting to make the right decisions on their behalf.
I didn't think Andy Dalton was going to make it to the end of the game as the starter just because I believe 4 or 5 times that Justin Fields came in, he just seemed so cool and collected. He made the right move. It wasn't flashy. He didn't try to go for the home run because he was in the game. He just literally played quarterback, which is actually the most impressive thing to me because it's obviously a weird situation. Like he handled the fans booing so well. It's obviously a strange situation, but it seemed to me playing couch quarterback or couch coach that I'm just sitting there thinking he's just going in and playing quarterback and doing it at a high level, and then he just goes back to the sidelines. Like it's not a Justin Fields package. It's just like if Andy Dalton were in the game, they would have called basically the same thing, and then Justin Fields makes something happen with his legs. That was good to see, especially since actually we thought we might see less rushing. It's always, yes, Justin Fields is fast, but he actually is looking to pass, and we know that. But in fantasy, we would like him to take off here and there, and it was nice to see that utilized. The last person is actually the person that we probably gave the most flack this offseason, and I thought he looked pretty darn good. So Mac Jones leads the Patriots to an almost win. Oh, unfortunately, Damian Harris was the one who fumbled away the game. But Mac Jones almost got him there. And I thought that Mac Jones looked to handle things pretty well. He didn't do anything too flashy. But then again, the Patriots aren't going to ask him to do anything too flashy. So if you drafted Mac Jones and you felt like you were going to get a ceiling out of him, I do think that might be in your range of outcomes.
Right. And he led all rookies in terms of completion percentage over expected. He was calm, cool, collected. I mean, passing to at least what we consider to be like one of the less flashy, like pass catching cores like in the league, and operated quite well against a defense that, if I'm remembering the stat correctly, has forced a turnover in 23 consecutive games.
Yes.
So it's just, that's pretty impressive. Like right out the gate, we knew Miami has a solid defense and he operated well. It just came down to a turnover that was not his fault. So I think for all the naysayers, the people that laughed at the fact that the Patriots were taking Mac Jones where they did, it's just, I think now they're seeing all that stuff like come back to them. Receipts I've already seen like on social media, receipts being collected on the folks that hated Mac Jones. But I think that you can already see the floor is already there for Mac Jones against a good defense. So this next week, what he plays against the Jets, if I'm not mistaken. So this ought to be a really interesting test of what Jones is capable of against a much lesser defense.
I don't think that the reasonable take was to hate on Mac Jones. It was to hate on Mac Jones at 3, and that was really unfair to Mac Jones. And at the end of the season, you kind of had to acknowledge that it's not Mac Jones' fault. There were random rumors that he was going at 3. I hoped he would fall to Washington. I thought that would have been a good fit. But at 15, it was pretty good value, I'd say. But I just feel like I need to say sorry to Mac Jones because I didn't think I liked him. And that guy is cool. He threw his first touchdown pass, and everybody tried to give him the ball for him to keep. He was like, no, you take it. Somebody else gave it to him. No, you take it. And then it ends up Brian Hoyer ends up taking the ball. And then he goes and sits down and he's just doing breathing exercises. That's my dude. That's a cool dude. So I actually think I might have to get in on the Mac Jones train. So that's all 5 rookie quarterbacks and what they did in week 1. We thought we would revisit that. My rankings didn't change from anything that I saw. Trevor Lawrence is still the one just because he's far and away better than all of the other quarterbacks. Well, maybe not Justin Fields. You see Justin Fields right behind me. So maybe not far and away better than Justin Fields, but he is just he's so good that he's insulated from whatever mess is going on around him. But besides that, that's all we've got for today. I hope everybody had a great week 1. Do you have anything else for the crowd, Chris?
No, that's it. Let's try not to overreact. Let's just react responsibly to the week 1. Enjoy the victory laps. Catch y'all next week.
Peace.
Peace.